Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. I'm Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law, and today I'm joined by Tracy Simmons. She is the Associate Dean of Admissions and Student Affairs at Howard University School of Law. Welcome, Dean Simmons.
Thank you for having me, Roberts. Happy to be
I'm
here.
very, very excited to have you on today because I know that you have written a book for aspiring law students. But first, I just want to acknowledge the admissions space and the student affairs space in law schools right now is so very challenging. And so I wonder if you can share with our audience what your history is in these roles in the academy and kind of what the most significant challenges you see for people like you who are running our admissions and student affairs offices.
So I think I've now been I've worked for 5 ABA law schools, including my current law school. And I have basically been in this space for about 27 years. And so always in admissions, mostly admissions financial aid. Eventually there were some diversity initiatives or things of that nature. And this is my first full stint in the student affairs space. And I think what I have seen over the years, there are a lot of similarities and there are a lot of things that are very, very different. I think the level of stress and anxiety for our law school applicants and law students is just really different. I think the pressure from the outside world, but also the pressure that they're putting on themselves just makes this really, really challenging in a very different way. I would acknowledge the fact that I think some of this started during COVID. I remember there was a point in which applications began to increase. And I think for some people, they thrived during COVID in that they were isolated. They couldn't go out. They couldn't play. And so their grades began to shoot up. That made the process much more competitive in some ways. It also led to some candidates being able to focus more on the LSAT prep and things of that nature. And so I remember having participating in a national pre-law advisor type call that LSAC hosted. I wasn't participating, but I attended. And I remember some pre-law advisors talking about how shocked they were that some of their students were not getting into some of the schools that they thought were sure bets or safety schools. And that whole game has changed. And I think it's changed for forever. And I think that when you're looking at many of the institutions, we've had to adjust to the market, meaning, we're not taking the same size classes we were 20 years ago, even 15 years ago. And so that means that you have this increased pull, increased interest with fewer seats. And ethically, obviously, we're concerned about the job market, and we want to make sure that we are giving our students as much attention as we can, for student faculty ratio, for those writing courses, for the clinical opportunities and career services and professional development, et cetera. And so I think that the confluence of all these things, coupled with now the world being on fire and the interest in law school just being at its peak, because when we know that when things change in the world, there's a lot of interest, con law, health law, immigration, intellectual property, things like that, right? But then you add this new layer of what's happening with financial aid. And so I think the anxiety around all of that and worrying that, you've spent 20 years, 25 years preparing for this next step and not knowing what that might look like. I saw a post on X or something like that where this mother was talking about another industry. Her daughter had been preparing to go into, say, the State Department or something of that nature her whole life, kept her grades up, did specific internships, et cetera. And she was like, what am I supposed to tell her? And I remember reading that and thinking, this is the exact conversation we are having at the law school level. It's just a different industry, but the need to pivot, I think, has become even more important. But I think that has led to increased anxiety and things like that when you have many, many young people who have been fixated on one thing and don't necessarily know how to pivot. Social media hasn't helped them learn how to pivot. No. And so we're just in a really tough spot, I think.
So you mentioned pre-law advisors, and of course, they're on the front lines of these students who maybe have been planning all along to go to law school or learned about law school from one of the many pipeline programs that law schools do or that the Law School Admission Council does, or even that the pre-law advisors do. And so what advice would you give to pre-law advisors or political science department chairs and others who will be advising potential applicants in this very competitive pool?
I would definitely start with the idea that we need to encourage our students to be more open-minded. We need to encourage them to have plan B, C, D, and E. And I think that doesn't mean that you're telling them that they can't achieve their goal or they won't get that dream job, but it may mean that the path to that dream job is a little little different. The Department of Honors Justice Program is a perfect example. We have tons of students if that's their interest, but right now that doesn't exist in the same form. And so that doesn't mean it will never be available, but if that's your goal, then our job is to help you prepare for the same skills that you need to develop, but maybe at a firm or maybe at a nonprofit or maybe at a different type of entity. And so I do think that for the pre-law advisors, it's a tough spot because you don't want to feel like you are squashing someone's hope and dreams and things of that nature. But the reality is that you have to begin helping them to see the need to pivot. The reality is that we still need them. We need them to go to law school. We need more fresh lawyers and fresh ideas and concepts and things like that in the next 3 to 5 years, 3 to 10 years. But the reality is that it may look a little different. And I think we need to, I'm going to use social work language because I was a social worker before I went to law school. And so I think the idea sometimes of wrapping these services around them is important. So that could mean that you're bringing them in to hear from career development people on your campus, having them attend panels where they're career folks from the law schools talking about the pivot, where you're bringing in law school admissions people to talk about what this looks like from a choice perspective in terms of maybe you don't apply to 5 schools, maybe you have to save up money and apply to 10, or the schools that you thought were your sure bet. There are no sure bets in a lot of spaces now because the stats are so competitive. And so maybe you have to expand your list. And lastly, I would say I'm a big believer that there are 198 or 199 ABA law schools out there. All of them have successful alumni. All of them have successful faculty who have connections, and all of them have successful, students in mock trial and moot court and journals and things of that nature. And so it may be that the school that you dreamed of going to, if they don't make the offer, but another ABA law school does, then maybe that's your school. And I think that adjustment is really hard for a lot of folks, but I do think that we need to have those conversations because that is the reality for some folks.
Completely agree. The rankings have not done students and potential applicants any favors because so often students will look at that and go, oh, well, this one's ranked higher than that one. Maybe I should go there. And you're right. All of the schools that are accredited by the ABA are providing, very strong legal education programs or they wouldn't be accredited. And also it's about the fit, right? It's about, you don't want to go to a higher ranked school where nobody's going to know your name if you're really used to a small liberal arts college. And you just have to sort of figure out what your priorities are for the environment you're going to spend those 3 or 4 years.
I would add non-negotiables. I love that framing that you gave in terms of what you can. And I think I kind of say, like, what are your non-negotiables? What are the things you absolutely know you need to be successful? And what are the things that are kind of like, this would be great? Because I think for many students, when they really look at that list, they're going to find way more schools than they expected.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Before we move on to your recent publication, I wanted to ask about financial aid. I think you're one of the few guests I've had that have an expertise and a historical context for what's happening with financial aid. And so what are you telling students?
So we are doing a lot in that space. So I don't know if you're aware, but the law school world, we started meeting during COVID every Wednesday to talk about financial aid. And so we still meet every Wednesday. And the folks are admissions professionals, financial aid professionals, academic success, bar support, etc. And so we are talking about communications. So I actually have 2 communications from 2 different schools, one in Texas, one in Boston, that I had my staff take, and we created our own kind of cheat sheet, more or less, to send out to prospective students and our current applicants to talk about what the changes will be starting July 1, what the parameters are, what the loan limits will be, and things of that nature. So we're doing our best to try to educate people so that they can make informed decisions, but also to really kind of learn the terminology and learn the language, and then also learn the right questions to ask. I do think that, over the last 25, 27 years, the way financial aid has changed is so drastic. And I think it's going to be really jarring for folks to realize that starting with July 1, things like if you transfer, you're no longer considered a legacy. And so you probably won't be able to access the traditional financial aid that you had. And private loans are going to become even more important. So your credit is going to become more important. So starting to look at your credit now, I would say that on the last 3 or 4 virtual events I've done done with other law schools, I would say at least 3 out of the 4 have been somehow tied to financial aid because it's such a area of concern for folks, and it's so complicated. And so I'm trying to find every chart I can to share, every list I can break down that gives just the kind of basics. I've even sent stuff to my current students so that they're aware of what's happening so they can make good decisions moving forward. But it's really more complicated than I think we realize. And because so many things haven't been settled, that is unnerving for the applicants, but also for the students. And I'll lastly say that one of the biggest challenges I think is that oftentimes we at the law school level are often finding out about the updates and changes at the same time the applicants are finding out. Like we see the news and that's when we learn what's happening. And so then we're at an event or at a recruitment table or online and they're like, so what are you going to do? And it's like, well, we're just reading it now and we'll have to get back to you because we have to do some research too, because we just literally don't know. And that's hard because we're supposed to be experts. We're supposed to be professionals, but it's hard to really be that expert and that professional when you literally are you just saw a news take thing that talks about that particular issue or that update. So
no, you're exactly right. I mean, we're finding out in real time. And the people that I worry about most, and, we'll see this summer with our admitted students and who's able to matriculate and who isn't, are the underrepresented folks, the ones who don't have mentors in the profession, who don't have strong pre-law programs, who are navigating this themselves and are sure they can borrow 100% of their tuition and fees, but are forgetting about living expenses or moving or whatever the case may be. It is going to be jarring, and that's unfortunate. I'm glad that you're sending out communications. I know we are endeavoring to do the same, and we'll just have to see how this all plays out. But unfortunately, I think it's the students who will bear the brunt of these changes. So now, along those lines, there are students who are not as well informed when they go to law school or when they're thinking about law school or even when they're in law school and they're feeling overwhelmed because, oh my goodness, this is more than I thought. Oh, I don't belong here. Everyone else is so much smarter than me. Those kinds of things. And I'm betting that your book, Law School for Dummies, second edition, helps to address some of these things. So I was intrigued when I saw that this second edition of Law School for Dummies came out. And why don't you start by telling us why you wrote the book, what prompted you to write the book, and how it connects, if at all, to the first edition?
So I am probably the only person on the planet who had never planned to write a book. I feel like every time I tell someone or if someone asks me about the book, I have to give the caveat that I wasn't the person who had always dreamed of writing a book, because everyone says like, oh, I've been thinking about writing a book. And so a good friend and colleague who went to law school, has worked in the law admission space for a really long time, but always wanted to be an author, finally took the leap and does consulting now, but also is a full-time author and agent. And so she was talking to someone at Wiley Publishing and they were saying, hey, this book has not been rewritten in 30 years. Do you know anyone? And she basically approached me and said, I feel like you're someone who's been around for a long time. You're a mentor to a lot of us and you've worked in a lot of different spaces. Would you be open to it? And I hesitated because I feel like it's overwhelming and I was worried about making sure that I have enough information to share with everyone. I wasn't even sure of the scope of the book at that point, and so long story short, had me come up with a table of contents and things of that nature. And they said yes, and we were off and running. In terms of the book itself and how it's tied to the first edition, so the way that the Dummies series works is that you basically build off the previous edition. Now, the challenge here was that they didn't realize how much law school admissions had changed from 30 years ago.
Oh,
and so,
yeah.
for example,
totally different.
So it took a lot longer than they expected because there were things like call LSAC for the 2 or 3 times they offer the LSAT per year. And it's like, there's no one to call. Or there was no information about belonging and equity and inclusion and neurodivergency and accommodations and different types of jurisdictions in terms of the bar. None of that stuff existed. So I think once I got into it, I was really fascinated because I realized there's so much information that needs to be shared. And I'm first gen. And so I didn't know anyone when I was applying to law school. I applied to law school because I was doing social work for a nonprofit agency and didn't understand why none of the lawyers were talking to each other and thought, well, maybe I should go to law school too. And then I I went to the admissions office because I kept saying, I really like the admissions financial aid team. And I kept saying, what is this job? Like, what's an admissions dean and what do you do? So that's how I ended up here. And so I feel like it's an opportunity for me to share all the wisdom that I've been given from all the deans I've worked with, all of the pre-law advisors I've worked with, all the students that I get to work with and alumni, but most importantly, probably my admissions and financial aid and student affairs colleagues. I just feel like every day I learn so much from them and I'm good at my job because of them. And so I'm hoping that I've been able to pass a little bit of that wisdom down through the book. I hope it's a resource. It basically starts with picking a law school, but it goes through, graduation and the bar and things of that nature. And so it's for everyone who's interested in the law school space. There's a little bit of something, I think, for anyone who's applying to law school, in law school, on their way out.
Before we talk more about the contents of the book, I just want to stop and acknowledge, one, how wonderful it was that this friend and colleague reached out to you. And let's hear it for our mentors and those who lead the way for us and open spaces for us. But then the other piece is, I love that you, this woman who's highly experienced and has tremendous value in her 27 years of experience in this space, also was like, I don't know if I have anything to say. I don't know if I can do this. And I just want to say, if any students are listening, or even young lawyers or anybody in their career, imposter syndrome is real for all of us. I tell my students that all the time. In some spaces, I'm like, ooh, I don't know, like, why am I even here? And I can't believe I'm here. And I don't know how I'm going to measure up to all those people who are around me. And that's where I am right now. And the fact that you have been in this space for so long and you still had that feeling, I'm glad that your friend and colleague urged you to do this and that you did it. I'm not surprised at all that you accomplished this. So congratulations to you on the publication of the book.
I feel very humbled and very honored, but I think the imposter syndrome and the feeling like you're not enough is such a big thing. And I think coming into the student affairs space, I think for me made me even realize more how pervasive it is in this space. And I think people make a lot of assumptions about people that go to law school in terms of being a certain type of personality and having a certain level of confidence. And that's not all of us. Many of us are here because we had goals that we wanted to accomplish, but we weren't necessarily thinking that we could or didn't necessarily know how to. And so I'm grateful for all the people in the spaces. I think mentoring is such a fundamental part of law and law school. And I just don't know of any dean, any professor, any lawyer that I've spoken with over the last 20 something years who has not somehow referenced someone that supported them, someone that gave them guidance, someone that gave them a boost of confidence or you got this, pat on the back type thing. And so thank you for acknowledging that, because I do think it's a big deal. And it's definitely a big part of this journey.
It certainly is. And those of us who have had that advantage, that we need to pay it forward, right? And
yes,
what I thought you were going to say is you haven't talked to anybody in this space who wouldn't say yes to someone reaching out and saying, can you help me? Will you mentor me? And all of that. So that's the flip side. All of us had people help get us here. And so for those listening who are unsure and need some guidance, reach out to a lawyer, a law professor, a dean, some sort of colleague who has more knowledge about whatever you want to know than you do. I've never seen anybody say no. So that's good. Okay, let's move on to Law School for Dummies. So it starts with choosing a law school. Tell me a little bit about what the readers can expect from that chapter and the rest of the book.
So I think I try to take the approach of what would I say to my mentee, or what would I say to my goddaughter or my godson. I have 5 goddaughters and 1 godson. And so what would I say to them? And so I try to think about it from the perspective of, if you know nothing, where would you start? But also, if you had to come up with your wish list of things, what would you be looking for? And I think of all the people who kind of have helped me along the way. And so I think the goal is to be as simplistic as possible and as direct as possible. That tends to be my approach in life anyway, but that kind of works with the Dummies formula, so to speak, is that the goal is to make it as readable and as user-friendly as possible. And so I will say one issue for me was thinking about the fact that my legal writing and research professors might see this and think that some of my use of contractions and things like that is inappropriate appropriate. But again, I kept freaking out about it. And they're like, you cannot do that because you're not writing for lawyers. You're writing for an audience who maybe doesn't know anyone that is a lawyer kind of thing. And so I think the approach in general is to really kind of break it down from beginning to end, like from each step, and kind of think about the perspective of the law school applicant who doesn't have a pre-law advisor, who doesn't have a mentor that's a lawyer, or doesn't know anyone who's gone to law school, and to try to give you enough information to ask the right questions, to use information on the website that might be helpful for you, and to basically help you come up with your list of, as we said, the things that really matter to you, the non-negotiables, and then basically build from there. I do think that a lot of what we've done is we've tried to kind of give basic examples, but to give a good overview. I mean, at some point, the book is so long, and it could have been longer, which is nuts because there's so much information, and we had to cut like examples and the voices for experience type thing because it's just so long that we wanted to be usable and user friendly. But as you well know, having done this work for a while, like you could spend 3 days and in 5 chapters just talking about personal statements and what makes a well-written statement and what to do and not to do, etc. And so trying to break it down while giving enough information but keeping it simplistic enough that people will find it useful. I think that's the overarching theme, is getting what you need and then kind of adding to your own toolkit as you kind of make these decisions along the way, and then using it as a reference along the way because you can bookmark and things like that, go back and ask questions as you learn more, as you gain more experience and more knowledge, adding to that Google Doc or that spreadsheet or whatever you've created with your list of schools you're interested in over time.
Well, and that addresses our prospective law students. And as you and I both know, some people start thinking about law school as early as middle school. And so yes, I think this book is something maybe high schoolers, middle schoolers, or high schoolers and their parents might want to look at. But then you also mentioned that it's good for students already in law school. So maybe talk about the person who's about to start law school and then maybe the person who's already in law school.
So I think there are a couple things that we try to do in terms of talking through what you need to start law school. I think there are a lot of questions about what do I need to bring if I'm moving? And so we have, list of things that they can add to their wish list on Amazon or wherever they may have people that are trying to support them, but also talking a little bit about how to balance your friends and family. I think that's a real issue for a lot of first generation students, a lot of older, more seasoned students who have familiar responsibilities or jobs, and thinking through like time management is one of the big chapters in there that we talk a little bit about kind of how you do all these things, but also just really kind of getting your bearings and just calming yourself down and remembering that you're not the only one who's doing this for the first time, that there are many people in your law school community who will be there and it will be their first law school class, their first time getting called on, their first time writing a brief, and giving you some substantive tools to think through these things, but also thinking about how you may frame your questions for your professors or your study group or your mentors while in law school. And then I think going into more detail about student organizations and how to utilize them, how to utilize your mentors, how to take advantage of all the different clinics and specialty areas that your law school may offer, and then thinking through the career piece. And I think this is one of the areas that, again, when I was looking at the first edition versus the second, we didn't talk about alternate careers back then. It was only really focused on big law and the firm jobs. And it's like, that's not where we live. I have tons of students that I meet regularly, and they're like, I want to go to law school, Dean Simmons, and I think I want to do X. Is that acceptable? And it's like, whatever you want to do is acceptable. The biggest issue, do you know that you're willing to work hard, and are you able to handle the rigor of these type programs? But you can do what you want. And so changing that framework and changing that narrative, I think is something we try to do in the book as well, in terms of just exploring all the different opportunities that are out there, because there's so many. I do a lot of pipeline work, and one of the things I found many years ago was this document that has the 300 plus things you can do with a law degree. And it's one of my favorite pieces, and I've kept it and I brought it with me at every job I've moved to, and I share it all the time because I think it's important that this degree can change not only the generational wealth of your family from opportunity perspective, but what you're exposed to. I don't think people realize how big this degree is. You are exposed to so many different areas of law, and then you begin to realize that the world does not function without lawyers. And so you're really important in a lot of different spaces. And while your family and friends will want all the free advice and things of that nature, in lots of different jobs, your perspective, your ability to critically think and write and process information becomes so important. And so trying to emphasize the fact that it's an important degree, it's an important journey, and that if you've made this choice, that there are tools and resources within your framework to help you. And And so I think, we go into the bar, different types of bars. And I mean, I feel like that part was probably the most crazy part to write, only because by the time I would say, okay, these jurisdictions are moving to next gen, and then I'd have to go back and say, okay, there are two more.
Yeah,
and at
exactly.
one point they were like, okay, no more, like no more. At some point you just have to stop, because they're like,
Right.
We can't keep editing. We have to get the book out at some point. But that's complicated. And I think right now for most law schools, as you well know, that piece is hard, because students have to think a little earlier now, potentially, about where they want to be licensed, because the requirements might be different. There are some states where they need to register in their first year within the first semester versus, in their last year, and things like that. So trying to incorporate some of that information, so again, that it goes for the life cycle of a law student, is what we try to do here.
Well, it sounds like a tremendously comprehensive resource, Law School for Dummies, second edition by Tracy Simmons, and such a great resource for your prospective students as a how-to guide, but then also for managing law school once you're in there and maximizing your opportunity for success. So it really sounds terrific. And I love what you ended with, that the skills that are built, it's about earning more for your family, that kind of thing. But the trajectory can be so significant. And you're right, without lawyers, we have no democracy, right? There's so many things that don't function without lawyers. So it's certainly taking your place in the community, a place of responsibility and working for the public good in a lot of ways. So thank you for writing the book. Congratulations on Law School for Dummies, second edition. And I'm going to conclude by asking you the question I ask all my guests, and that is, what are your predictions for the future of legal education in the coming decade?
Ooh, that's a big question. So I think that, one, we will see major changes to how we teach law as it relates to artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and things of that nature. I think that we will have to be nimble enough to figure out ways to incorporate it into what we're teaching our students, while understanding that it can't really replace the people, right? I think there's enough data out there so far that's showing that lawyers are being sanctioned by trying to just use ChatGPT or AI because it's making up cases that don't exist and things of that nature. But I think there's a responsible way that we're going to have to incorporate it into the curriculum to make our students as competitive as possible, because I do think that timing and the culling of information that can be done in the AI space is something to be mindful of. And so the speed in which we are doing research and things of that nature, I think is something we'll have to be very thoughtful about. I also think that I'm interested to see where things go as it relates to things like choosing a law school that's for you based on the quality of experience you want to have and the opportunities and outcomes, because I'm in a really different space than I've been in the last couple of years. And so I'm trying to watch more of what deans and other podcasters and folks are talking about. And I'm definitely finding that I'm getting more applicants who seem to be more sophisticated in that they are being much more thoughtful about cost of attendance, actual career statistics, bar pass rate, cost of living in a certain region, potential outcomes and things like that, but basically quality of life. And I think when I went to law school, we had that adage during orientation where you look to your left, look to your right, one of you is not going to be here next year. And now we say, look to your left, look to your right, that's going to be co-counsel, that's going to be a hiring partner, that's going to be someone that you appear before that you want to have a friendly relationship with. And so I do think that we're slowly changing the culture of law in some ways, which I think is super important. I think we'll always have Socratic method and things of that nature, because there's just something about that I feel like for some of you professors, like it just makes you happy, and that challenge just has to be there as part of the tradition of law school. But I do think that the care in which we are creating programming is very different, and I think that will continue. And so having more access to therapy and counseling service and group work and things like therapy dogs, and actually talking about trauma and imposter syndrome and having work sessions on these things, I do think that will continue to change. I love the fact that so many law schools that I'm aware of have just incorporated so many different things into their wellness programming and things like that. Like, we didn't talk about wellness 25 years ago. I mean, we didn't talk about it 15 years ago. I mean, and on a real tangible level, but now it's very specific and very intentional, and it's part of the budget. And so I think those are the three big things that will have a mark, have an impact on where we are in the next next, 5 to 20 years. And then lastly, I'll just say, I think all those things are also tied to the expectations of our applicants, though, and the expectations of our students. I think they expect us to do better. I think the adage that, I suffered so you can suffer doesn't really work with this generation of students and lawyers.
No,
And it
it
probably
sure
shouldn't, right?
doesn't.
And it probably shouldn't. And so I think we're going to be accountable for that. And whether that's the curriculum as it relates to AI and new technology, whether it's, making sure that we're being thoughtful about our wellness programming or things of that nature, I think all those things are going to be part and parcel to creating a very different law school world. And I think it will be a world that we can be really happy with, because I think we're going to train more responsible, responsive, thoughtful leaders in the law space. And we need them, particularly now.
Absolutely. Well, Dean Simmons, after talking to you for a little over a half an hour, I can see why you were the natural author for the second edition of Law School for Dummies. I really enjoyed our conversation. And if you did as well and want to listen to additional thought leaders in legal education, you can find Aspen Leading Edge on your favorite podcast channel or on the Aspen Leading Edge podcast webpage. Thank you so much.
Thank you.